Hello, my name is Corey Murphy. I am recording this video for my organizational behavior and design class uh, for the Master's in Business Administration degree. Um, to give a little bit of background about myself, I played baseball at Rogers State for the past 2 years. I am graduated now. I have no more eligibility left, but I've really enjoyed my time at RSU. I've enjoyed the school. I've enjoyed the community. I'm from Chelsea, Oklahoma, which is just 25 minutes from Rogers. I grew up there my whole life. Um, but yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Um, so the first slide, the world of work has gotten harder, and I believe that's relative to your point of view. I believe that's relative to uh, what you see as hard. Uh, a pastor that I know and love says, hard is not bad; it's just hard. Uh, and this relates to chapter 2 when it talks about job performance. Is it hard because we aren't performing like we wish, or is it hard because during the midst of a pandemic we're being forced to work from home? Or so that's I believe that's relative to each person. Slide number 2, it says change has been fast and furious. During the start of the pandemic, companies averaged 7 years of progress in a few months, with many changes happening 20 to 25 times faster than expected. When I see this, I think of the vaccine. It was the fastest produced vaccine of all time, and that was expedited by the president. And I believe that some of that has been very good, like the vaccine. It needed to be done as quickly as possible. It needed to be produced so it could be given to the masses. But at the same time, I think that change being fast and furious can also be bad. I'm sure we all have our own experience uh, when something goes so fast that sometimes it gets out of control. I work construction for my dad from time to time, and there's a guy that also works for my dad, and he's very fast paced. He's a fast paced worker, and he's a good worker. But at times he gets so fast and so out of control that he messes something up. And then we have to then take the time to take that back apart and then put it together the proper way. So change can also be being too fast can also be a bad thing. Um, Slide number 3, it says helping employees with fluid work conditions and stress. 30% of employees or employed adults took a leave of absence. 56% experienced increased anxiety around job security, and 55% found changes in work routines and organization stressful. And this is basically what chapter 5 is all about. It's all about stress. And I probably have a different outlook than a lot of people do when it comes to taking a leave of absence or experiencing increased anxiety about a job. Um, and finding changes in a work routine and organization stressful. To me, I believe that speaks a lot to the character of a person. Are they able to adapt? Are they able to overcome adversity? That when adversity hits, uh, do they allow the adversity to shape their world, or do they allow their world to shape the adversity? To me, I've never been a person that backs down from adversity. My whole life, my baseball career, I was always told as a child that I've played baseball since the time I was 3 years old, uh, and my whole life I've always been told, you're too small, you're too weak, you don't throw hard enough, you're not big enough, you're not tall enough, you don't throw, and so my whole life I've gotten this doubt. Even from my own father, who's an extremely supportive of my baseball career. He just wanted me to embrace reality in his mind. He just told me, son, you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that you're probably not going to be able to play college ball like you've always hoped. That's always been a dream of mine. And instead of allowing that to shape me, I allowed myself to shape that, if that makes sense. I use that as fuel to drive even harder, to work even harder, to spend extra hours in the gym, to spend extra hours on the field, working at my craft. So I probably have a different viewpoint on that than a lot of other people, but I don't discount their thought process or how they feel. Uh, our behaviors and habits have changed, and that's interesting. Um, because during in the midst of a pandemic, you're stuck at home. you're asked not to leave your house. Everybody's in quarantine, or if one of your family members gets COVID, or if you've been in contact with somebody recently that has COVID, uh, you're now asked to stay at home, which is very different. It's very uncommon, but I know a lot of people that that's been very good for. They've got, people. A lot of people's lives revolve around work. They revolve around the almighty dollar, and this pandemic, if nothing else, has allowed us to take a step back and realize what the most important thing is. And I believe that that's family. And so it's allowed people to spend a lot more time with their families. Uh, and I believe it's helped a lot of us come to the realization that work should never overtake family. That work is simply a means of getting finances to provide for my family. On slide number 5, meaningful and purposeful work. 1 in 4 employees see meaningful work as the most important to job satisfaction, with 69% wanting to work for companies with clearly stated values. 9 in 10 would take a pay cut if it meant they could find meaningful work. And let me pull up in the book here. So that's chapter 4, job satisfaction. It's all about job satisfaction and where we find our satisfaction in our job. Is it in our performance? Is it in leadership? It's in all these different things. For me, I honor that. I respect that. People want to make an impact. They want to make a difference. That's why, nurses during this time period, and first responders, and the medical field has gotten so much honor, because they deserve it for what they've done in this pandemic, in the midst of it, and people have seen the meaningfulness of the work that they do. And I don't want to discount other people's work by any means, but I hope that the reason people want to find meaningful work is to make an impact for others, not to get glory for themselves. But I find that to be a very interesting statistic, that 90% would take a pay cut if it meant that they could find meaningful work. And that could vary from person to person, because some people are going to find meaningfulness in being on the front lines and being the first person to be there in the midst of a crisis. And then you have others, like my wife, for example. My wife while it would be meaningful, she would hate to have to be the person that is out front with the focus on. She's a very drawn back person. She doesn't like the attention to be on her. So I think that can vary from person to person. Slide number 6, 68% of employees would consider quitting their current job to work for an organization with stronger viewpoints on social issues that matter most to them. And I find this very, very interesting. I probably think differently on this topic than a lot of different people. But I don't think that who you work for, I don't think their view on social issues should determine who you work for, if that makes sense. To me, that's no concept of authority. If you have authority in your life, for example, your boss, they don't have to agree with everything you say to be your boss. And you to disagree or be willing to quit your job to go to a boss that shares your views, to me, that's the easy way out. That's no concept of authority, because authority is there whether you acknowledge it or not. But without you acknowledging it, it can't function properly, and it can't do in you what it needs to. So I find it very interesting that social issues have to do with whether or not we're going to work for somebody. That to me, I would never allow that to get in the way of what I were to do. Because we all have different opinions, we all have different viewpoints, and we can have conversation about it. But just because you don't agree with me or I don't agree with you doesn't make me stupid, you stupid, or either of us wrong. Somewhere along the way in society, we have made it where if you don't agree with me, you're less of a person than I am. And I believe that politics has done that. I believe the media has done that. But we've bought into it, which is sad, in my opinion. hybrid work is here to stay. 1 in 3 remote workers may quit if required to return to the office full time, and 80% of employees will spend at least 1/4 of their time working from home in the future. Again, I believe that there's no concept of authority here. If your boss, who is your authority, asks you to come back to the office, there shouldn't be a hesitation or a question. When they tell you to come back, it's time to come back. Like I said, that's a concept of authority. Me respecting the place that you have, the authority that you have, and that you have partial control over what I do. In being my boss, you are my authority. So I find it interesting that they would quit if required to return to the office full time. To me, that's selfish. Um, but I probably think differently on a lot of these things. In the last slide, to help people thrive, we must uncover what truly inspires them to do their best. And that's chapter 6. That's motivation. Is it extrinsic motivation or is it intrinsic motivation? To me, extrinsic motivation is fleeting. We should never rely. Now, I'm not saying as a boss, you shouldn't find a way to pull the best out of every single person. I believe that to be true in baseball. Coaches, every person is different. For example, me and my style of play, if I were challenged by a coach, it always drove me to be better. They could yell at me, they could scream at me, and call more out of me. That was their coaching style that could work for me. When an example for like a teammate of mine, that might not work for them. Their coaching style, when they get yelled at, they might shut down. And that's important to understand. That's important to know, and I believe that's important to take into consideration because we do want the best performance out of each employee or each player or whatever we're in. But I do think that we have to make it very known and very clear that intrinsic motivation is not fleeting. Your intrinsic motivation, what matters most to you and why you do what you do, will always trump or overtake extrinsic motivation. For me, I'm a Christian. God is the center of my life. He's the forefront of the reason I do everything, and that will always matter more to me than extrinsic motivation. So I think for each person, I do believe that it is important to inspire them to do their best, to call the best out of them in whatever way that is for them. But I also think it's important that we find our own intrinsic motivation, because that's what's going to drive us. So that is my presentation for organizational behavior and design. Again, my name is Corey Murphy. I appreciated this class. I got a lot out of it, and God bless you guys.